In addition to her own garden, our next guest works to cultivate inclusive horticultural spaces. Here to tell us about her mission and the relaunch of her podcast, Black in the Garden, is Colah B Tawkin. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
You're a podcaster. You're going to have to pick up for my voice is cracking out
I
here.
got you. Yes.
You're from gardening. You're from Jacksonville, and I want to know how you kind of got into gardening.
Sure. So me getting into gardening, I actually got into gardening living in Jacksonville. I am one who was raised in Jacksonville, but not born in Jacksonville.
Okay.
And so, went to elementary, middle school, all the way up into UNF here, and then went to be a trucker and back and forth to Jacksonville. So my origins kind of revolve around that. But at one point, coming back to Jacksonville as an adult, I'm staying on the north side and I'm just trying to figure out some things in life. And I got into plants because I figured after taking a very natural journey with like having my hair be natural, having a natural childbirth and a home birth, actually, I was trying to find ways to live as naturally as possible. And gardening really aligned with that because I was trying to determine how can I get the most hyper-local food for myself and my family to keep, the chemicals out and things like that. And it did lead me to trying to figure out how to grow my own food, which I would say was a flop in my first attempt. Because one of the things about gardening is the misconception for those who think that you have to be perfect at it when you first get started is I tell people all the time, no, you have to kill a few plants to figure it out. Fortunately, that's not the same with like the medical profession,
Right.
where you get a few cadavers before you get success. But that was my journey. It was starting with wanting to grow my own food and getting my confidence shaken because I tried to do it intuitively.
Mm-hmm.
And I just figured seed, water, sun, I got this, but not so much. So I got into houseplants and succulents and just trying to figure out other things about plants. And then it's like I kind of got a bug and I was obsessed with houseplants for quite some time. And this was around, I would say 2016. I didn't really document my entry into gardening because I did not realize it was going to change my life in the way that it did.
So, Black gardening on social media, there has been kind of getting more attention.
Oh, yes.
Explain to me why that is.
Well, I advocate for it. And I'm not saying that it's booming because of me entirely. But what I can say that I know to be true is that there is an ancestral memory that's being activated. There's a return to the land. There's a return to having more of an interest in nature. There is land that is being passed from generation to generation. And there are people who are, Black people who are trying to figure out what to do with that land, how to activate that land. We're looking for refuge in going off grid and homesteading. We are having similar stories to what I just described in wanting to live a more natural way of life. And also we're just looking for methods that allow us to have some therapeutic reprieve from the stresses that are inherent to being Black in America or in the world. And I know houseplants have been a very big source of, therapy for Black people as far as I'm aware, because I get a lot of interactions and engagements and conversations with Black people who share their stories with me. And my story is kind of reflective in some points to many people who I've had conversations with.
So, there's some tension sometimes for people in experiencing gardening, particularly in communities of color,
Yes.
African Americans. Talk about facing that, processing it, how your podcast addresses that issue.
Okay. So run that back for me. I want to make sure I answer that question very well for you. So start from the top.
Historically, there has been exploitation of Black people,
Yes.
enslaved people,
Mhm.
and working the land. And
Yes.
so there is sometimes, I think, a reckoning that has to happen for people to embrace
Yeah.
agricultural,
I
side.
see what you mean. Okay. Thank you for reiterating that for me. So I call slavery involuntary gardening. And that obviously was forced upon Black people at that time. And so generationally, in consideration of what we were going to do as far as what our source of livelihood, income, or work would be, we strayed away from that because of the trauma that was associated with it. Like that labor it was literally backbreaking and just unrelenting. And so having those kind of connections took us a few generations out of it. Not every single family, obviously, but many families, that was an effect that was very real. But there are plenty of Black people who never left it. And so my platform definitely aims to emphasize those stories to make sure that people know that, like, sure, there have been people who went away, Black people who have went away from agriculture and any manner of a horticultural kind of interest or agricultural interest, but there are plenty who never went away from that. There are Black farmers in, mainly rural areas, but they are there and they are thriving, and those stories need to be told and heard. So it's job security for me.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, we're talking to the creator of the Black in the Garden podcast, focuses on the intersection of race and horticulture. And we welcome your questions or comments. You can reach us on air at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at wjct.org or reach out on social media. You dig into so many stories on your podcast.
Mm.
You have done stories about the secret gardens, the history of secret gardens that were planted by Black people during times of enslavement. Also witness trees, which I think is just a fascinating topic. Tell us a little bit about what witness trees are.
Witness trees. Actually, that was a talk that I gave for it was for an arboretum. It was for the Morton Arboretum. I was about to say Arnold. Shout out to Arnold, but it was for Morton Arboretum. I had to think about the salt. I did a webinar where we were discussing witness trees and Black people's connection to trees. I think about concepts, but in my platform being Black in the Garden and celebrating Black people's connection with plants and nature, I think about it through the botanical lens as far as how it is connected with Blackness. And so in discussing witness trees, what a witness tree is a tree that is an old tree, generally, that has witnessed a historic event. And so I know the term witness sounds a little bit dramatic, but it's true. These trees were around, and people are not thinking about trees when they're doing all manner of things, but the trees have witnessed things like war. They have witnessed basically anything that has happened in the environment where that tree was in view of that event. That makes it a witness tree.
Mm-hmm. And why is that an important symbol or, thing to recognize?
It's important. The context that I was coming from when I was considering putting that webinar together, one of the first things that I thought about was lynchings, unfortunately, because, I hate to go dark. I hate to be morbid. It's early in the morning. But what I thought about was how that connection to trees and trees, those witness trees being the witnesses to those types of heinous acts, I was thinking about how these are things that we need to put into the forefront so that we have a better understanding of why Black people have a lot of different triggers when it comes to different elements of nature that we may not feel connected with. And so by putting it out there and just being very explicit about what some of those issues are and what some of those triggers can be is a good way for us to get past that.
So your podcast is relaunching. One thing that I think is really interesting is you refer to your listeners as soil cousins.
Yes.
Tell us about that relationship you have with them.
So they're soil cousins. That terminology is important to me because I am very big on inclusivity. And I would come in at the beginning of the podcast in the first few years and months of me doing it, or the first few months, and I would say, hey, everybody, hey, guys, gals, and, however else you identify. But I hated that. I don't like for anybody to feel othered. So I said, what is the unit? Soil cousins. The soil is what connects us. And so that connection is very important to me because I started from literal scratch, ground zero, had no listeners. Nobody knew who I was. I'm nobody's industry plant by any means. That is a funny double entendre, possibly.
Yeah, right.
So we'll do something with that later. But My soil cousins are my supporters. Anybody who is aware of what is happening with Black in the Garden with the platform and who is supporting it, they are my soil cousins.
Well, Colah B Tawkin, congrats on the podcast relaunch. Thanks for being here. Thanks for what you do. It's really a fascinating lesson.
I appreciate that. And thank you for having me. I always, if we're concluding,
Mhm.
I always conclude with love, light, and soil.
Oh, very nice.